During the 1960s, there were two big events occurring: the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. The Civil Rights Movement aimed to outlaw racial discrimination against African Americans and to restore voting rights in the southern states. The Vietnam War was the North Vietnamese government, also known as the Viet Cong, fighting against the South Vietnamese in the U.S. It ended with U.S. forces leaving in 1973 and the unification of Vietnam under communist control 2 years later. More than 3 million people died, including 58,000 Americans. Many musicians during this time period wrote songs to speak out about this injustice. Few of those many musicians include Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, and Pete Seeger. Joan Baez was born on January 9, 1941, and became actively involved in the civil rights movement through her music. One performance was We Shall Overcome, and it became the civil rights anthem. Almost every folk singer has sung this song trying to speak out about something they believe in. Joan walked arm in arm with Martin Luther King Jr. in March of 1965 for voting rights for African Americans. She was trying to protect the rights of African American children to attend white schools. Joan Baez refused to pay her taxes because she knew that percentage was used to fund weapons in the Vietnam War. She was against the war, and so she performed the song, Where Have All the Flowers Gone? Joan put daisies in the ends of all the soldiers' guns to protest violence. The government at that time didn't want us to examine the war closely. They controlled the TV and fed us what they wanted us to think. Bob Dylan was a prominent singer/songwriter during the civil rights movement. He wrote the song Only a Pawn in Their Game after the murder of Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers lived in Jackson, Mississippi. Evers would try to recruit people into the civil rights movement. Medgar Evers was shot to death in his driveway by Byron de la Beckwith. In 1964, Beckwith was put on trial, but was set free. 30 years later, the case was reopened under pressure from civil rights leaders. February 1994, a racially mixed jury found Beckwith guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment at the age of 73. Bob Dylan wrote the song as a tribute to Medgar Evers to show how wrong his death was. On February 8, 1963, a tobacco farmer, William Zantzinger, and his wife attended a ball. William hit several employees with a toy cane because he was too drunk and wanted more drinks. After a while, he went in and ordered a drink from Hattie Carroll. At the time, Hattie Carroll was 51 years old and had 11 kids. Zantzinger said Mrs. Carroll was too slow, so he repeatedly struck her with his cane. Carroll told her co-workers that she felt deathly ill, and the ambulance was called. On February 9th, Carroll died of a stroke, and Zantzinger was charged with manslaughter. Someone showed Bob Dylan an article concerning the murder. Bob Dylan then wrote the song, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. The song showed how wrong the murder was, and to aware the people about it. August 28, 1963, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to more than 250,000 people during the March of Washington for jobs and freedom. Everyone came to see people speak about voting rights, equal opportunity for African Americans, and to end racial segregation and discrimination. Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, two singer-songwriters, marched together to express their opinions about segregation and discrimination. In the year after the march, the 24th Amendment was ratified, which abolished the poll tax. Also, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited racial discrimination in jobs and schools, and outlawed racial segregation in bathrooms. The March of Washington was a momentous occasion, and will always be remembered by the words that were spoken there and the people that marched there. March 16, 1968. American soldiers found unarmed women and children in the village My Lai instead of the Viet Cong that they expected to be there. The U.S. soldiers were brutal. They raped and tortured the villagers before killing them. They gathered young children and babies into a ditch and shot them to death. A soldier heard about the massacre and wrote a letter to President Richard Nixon. A journalist named Seymour Hersh wrote about the letter, and the news of the massacre was spreading everywhere. Students from Kent State heard about My Lai and were doing a peaceful demonstration to protest the Vietnam War on May 4th, 1970. Police officers and National Guards opened fire on the unarmed college students. The shooting only lasted 13 seconds. 4 students killed and 9 were wounded. 5 days after the shooting, 100,000 people marched in D.C. to protest the war. The massacre became a turning point for the nation. One of Bob Dylan's most well-known songs is Blowing in the Wind. It's asking us, how often is America going to make the wrong decision before we realize we've made a mistake? The lyrics are all metaphors about the war and America. The lyrics, "How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man?" refers to the racism that was felt in society between blacks and whites. The lyrics, "How many times can a man turn his head, pretending he just doesn't see?" refers to the ignorance of people who turn away from injustice and ignore the problems in society. The famous words that are repeated in the song, and is the title of the song, "The answer is blowing in the wind," means the answer is right in front of your face, people just doesn't reach out and grab it. Pete Seeger was an American folk singer and activist. For more than 50 years, Pete Seeger sang on the street corners, in saloons, union halls, schools, and churches. He popularized the anthem of the civil rights movement, "We Shall Overcome." The Vietnam War deeply offended Mr. Seeger. He wrote the song "Waist Deep in the Big Muddy." It refers to when a platoon was crossing a river in 1942. The captain ordered the platoon to continue into the river. They were waist deep in the murky water, and the captain drowned. In 1967, Pete Seeger was invited on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Seeger sang the song "Big Muddy" on the taping of the show, but the CBS management censored the song. The Beatles were a huge sensation in the 60s. The members Paul McCartney on bass, John Lennon on guitar, Ringo Starr on drums, and George Harrison on lead guitar. All the members were born in Liverpool, England in the 1940s. There were 2 Beatles songs that were on the top 20 songs in the 60s, "I Wanna Hold Your Hand" and "Hey Jude." They are the best-selling band in history, and they revolutionized popular music around the world. In the late 60s, John Lennon recorded a solo hit called "Give Peace a Chance" to protest the Vietnam War. The song became the most popular chant of the anti-Vietnam War movement.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something I think you'll understand.